Great. Thank you, Jake, for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to do this, the interview with us. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you grew up, any interesting hobbies you want to share?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Jake Williams. I grew up in a small town in Somerset called Weston-super-Mare, which is like a little seaside town that had like a tourist boom in the like Victorian era, and then just sort of left to decay since then. I now live in London, which has, say, an equal amount of history tied to it. I work in television during the day as an archive researcher. Spend most of my nights planning to write, but not always getting around to it.
That's interesting. How's your job as a TV recording then?
Yeah, it's good fun. It's good fun. It's always something different. Like my first story came out of a job where I was working nights around London, so I was sort of traveling on a lot of empty tubes and buses in the pitch black, and I was rushing after ambulances for a documentary about the London ambulance service.
Wow.
So I had a lot of downtime to kind of sort of plan out my first story, I guess, and read on the buses. And then when I was getting to the locations, it was always like ambulance call centers where they were getting the 999 calls. And I was listening into some of those calls. So it was a really weird kind of dystopian, like RoboCop kind of vision of London I had when I more or less first moved up here. So it was a really weird way to get to know the city. But yeah, it's always something different.
Right. What would you say is the most bizarre situation you've had at your work?
There's some really niche ones. Yeah, I guess it would have to be ambulance probably, or surgeons, which is a show filming surgeries as they happened. We just had to sort of be in the location and wait for a transplant to arrive, basically, which may or may not ever arrive. And one arrived at like 4 a.m. And it was a heart. So we had to then quickly rush, set up the surgery studio. And I remember thinking it's a really weird job when you're seeing someone's like internal organs before you've had breakfast.
Yeah. Definitely, I would think so.
No time to prepare and no necessary medical training to warrant, being in that room.
No, it's definitely something very interesting to think about. I was reading recently how there's this connection between poetry and photography. This was specifically for war photographers, but like you're in there in that moment, you have to capture this piece for the rest of the audience, the people who are caring about the situation. But you're stuck in this position where you can't actually be in that situation, and you're not really apart from it either. You're in this in-between zone. You'll definitely get like a lot of interesting ideas, writing ideas from there, I imagine. That's very interesting. How do you come up with your story ideas? We can definitely talk about Dwarf, Bearded Lady, and Smudge. And for the audience, this is a story about a traveling circus or carnival, you might say, where we're focusing on a family, a very interesting, unique family. And, we've got some plot twists, we've got some strong characters here. But what's unique about this is the setting itself with the traveling circus. So how did you come up with this idea, the plot? No spoilers, we won't do spoilers. So,
of course.
Just ideas in general.
Very, very flattering synopsis of the story, thank you. So there were a few kind of loose ideas I wanted to play with for a while. The kind of setting of the kind of traveling family in the carnival allowed me to use some of those ideas. Some of them were really small and stupid. Like, I love how on carnival rides there's always really dodgy paintings of celebrities. Like, eventually it became like very wonky, like Christian Bale Batman and sort of superheroes and stuff. And I always remember seeing there being like a sort of wonky painting of Will Smith on a lot of these rides, and I guess I found that really funny for some reason. And maybe I'm an audience of one in finding that particularly funny. But I knew I wanted to try and cram that image into a story. I always knew I wanted to do something in a powered down ghost train, and this kind of gave me an avenue to, just set a spooky scene in a powered down ghost train. Like, I've always liked the idea of kind of fake environments that are kind of deliberately lying to you, and the thought that it might be even scarier while it's not actively trying to scare you. I'd also read a lecture of Gordon Lish's where he talked about the attack sentence. He says you should always start a story with an attack sentence, a sentence rather, that kind of grabs you and forces you to pay attention. And the story opens with the line, "The kids are screaming." And I thought that was a pretty good attack sentence. And then you just have to kind of justify that sentence as you go along. Came quite organically. I don't like to plan too much. I kind of like having those pleasant surprises at the same time as the reader, hopefully. Just experimenting with the attack sentence kind of gave birth to the rest of the story, really.
I love that. And if we could elaborate a bit on your writing process, how do you set about your day for strictly writing?
So I almost kind of have to trick myself into sitting down and writing. If I tell myself all day, like, I'll get some writing done, then I've kind of assured myself, well, eventually some writing will happen, so I can guilt-free waste the next 12 hours of my day. So I always kind of have to kind of catch myself off guard and just kind of tell myself, like, oh, no, now's the time we're going to sit down and write. And then I think maybe even being kind of surprised by the act to make sure you're not planning too much in your head. You're not kind of thinking too far forward. And I always imagine it being quite laborious to kind of plan everything in your head. And then you have to sit down and do it, because then you're just, I don't know, it's almost like you're reading a script and you've got actors instead of characters, and you're going, right, well, now you have to go over here. And this is when you have an argument with this person. Whereas I much prefer writing dialogue and then going like, oh my God, he's going to say that? Like, that's horrible. And I like kind of being upset by what's coming out from the subconscious, I guess. And yeah, some of my favorite moments in my writing have come from when I'm thinking like, oh my God, why am I writing this? Like, where is this coming from? And it's normally when the kind of characters are bossing me around as opposed to the other way around.
I love that, yeah. When your writers come alive, when your characters come alive and, live it out for you, and you're just like carrying on and writing behind them. I love that. I love the beginning, how you said that you trick yourself into it. It's like when the water is cold, but you want to go swimming. So you have to trick yourself to just go ahead and go swimming.
Exactly that, yeah. If you tell yourself you're going to jump on 10, you won't jump. So you just have to jump.
We want to know about some early influences, or in general, like, when did you first become interested in writing? How was it like?
It's something I always knew I wanted to do. And when I was a kid, I remember writing lots of kind of Lord of the Rings rip-offs and Buffy the Vampire Slayer rip-offs. And I spent years watching YouTube videos of authors saying, oh, this is how you write. And I remember thinking like, well, I didn't learn it from this one, but maybe the next video I watch, I'll suddenly know how to be a writer. I'm like opening up on my notes app a story a few years before I started properly. And I thought, well, I'm not kind of committing to anything if it's on the notes app, so it's not embarrassing if it goes badly. And then eventually during lockdown, I kind of ran out of excuses. And yeah, I decided, well, I'll do it in a Word document, and I'll try and take it a bit more seriously. And I remember kind of wanting to tell everyone that I'd started writing something, but also being quite embarrassed about it. I kind of called my friend. He's like, oh, what are you up to? I was like, kind of wrote a story, and it felt like kind of very childish to say, oh, I've spent my time deliberately creating something of no kind of financial merit at all.
We find ourselves doing a lot of things that we didn't think we'd do during COVID-19. It's definitely one of those experiences. You said something about the time of COVID-19 that I thought it was interesting, though, about writers or artists in a similar time before.
Yeah, I kind of came to the realization, because a lot of the stuff I read is from kind of the 60s and 70s. Almost every one of those writers lived through the Second World War. And that kind of felt like a big catalyst for a lot of writing. Even the short story writers that went on to be the team for like the Twilight Zone, even though it seems very surreal and very separate from reality, a lot of it is about morality, and seems to be them kind of processing, seeing kind of how bad humanity can get. And I was kind of wondering for a really long time, like, well, what will our generation have to kind of spur that on? And a lot of the great writers now, I think, write from a place of almost like apathy, or just kind of looking at the world around and not being quite sure how they landed there. But yeah, these kind of unprecedented historical events keep happening. So I feel like we're going to have more and more kind of waves of sort of postmodern literature come out of it.
I think you are definitely going to get some interesting pieces, intentionally or not, this time. So this leads me to my next question. What's currently inspiring you to write? You mentioned you have some other works at play at the moment.
Yeah, I'm kind of juggling a few pieces and trying my hand at flash fiction. I've just started another long piece, and it's one of those ones, I'm about 4 or 5 pages in. I'm still not quite sure if it's going anywhere. It's yet to kind of take on a life of its own. But yeah, lots of little things kind of make me want to write or give me an idea. As I said in the questionnaire, like even just like mishearing something that sounds really absurd, and then you start imagining something very specific, and you kind of end up on this kind of long train of thought that takes you somewhere else. Like Like the first piece I had published is like sort of soft sci-fi called Source Material, and it's about like a community with a mine, but they don't mine coal or gold. It's kind of flesh, human flesh, and that all came from, I was cooking some herb fritters, and I was looking at the batter not being quite cooked, and I thought, oh, that still looks like it's source material, so that's not ready. And then I kind of thought, oh, that'd be a really creepy way to kind of describe flesh as source material. And I thought like maybe it'll be something about serial killer, and I just ended up kind of winding the most interesting route to justifying calling flesh source material, I suppose, for me. So yeah, it's always really weird little things that just trigger a train of thought, and you just have to catch yourself in those moments. I think everyone on their daily commute or when they're bored at work starts daydreaming, and if you can catch yourself while you're doing it and think, oh, I'd like to actually see that written down somewhere, you can kind of find yourself being the person to write it.
I definitely remember some very interesting memories from Stephen King of his novel on writing. Exactly that, he was getting some gas from some station, and he saw something like roll down by this like hill, and he was like, what if that's a body, and just like ran with it. What would you suggest for writers who are either new to writing or are looking to get some new writing ideas? Your career itself is very exciting, you see a lot of things happening, but for the average writer, any tips or any suggestions that they could take in their writer's toolbox?
It's very strange because I still feel very new to it and still feel very wet behind the ears, as they say. So I'm not sure if I'm in any position to be giving advice. But I will say, don't plan too far ahead if you're anything like me, because then it gets boring quite quick. You have to let yourself be surprised by what you're writing. You'll get a few pages into a story, and I feel like eventually it feels like something starts pushing back, and the story kind of tells you what it wants to be. Then it's just like a downhill drive because it's told you now, and you just have to kind of honor that. And whatever kind of twist or turn feels the most exciting and the most fun to write will probably be the most fun to read. If you find yourself kind of getting too bogged down in, oh, well, X should mean Y and Y should mean Z, and that's kind of the most natural progression of things, the reader can probably guess all those steps ahead of you as well. I think if you found yourself halfway through a book you're not enjoying, just resent the writer so much for having wasted 200 pages of your life. So try and write in a way where you wouldn't want to throw that book across the room if you were on the other end of it.
Very nicely said. So we're just wrapping up now. Is there anything else you want to say, either to writers, emerging writers, anything about your piece, or anything about your writing life in general? There's also that difficulty about, maintaining a career that, you've known your whole life and you're sustaining, and just diving into writing. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'd say if you're thinking of writing and you've got like a fairly demanding job, there's probably some luxury time that could be turned into writing. And even though it might feel like another kind of work, it's probably 10 times more fun than that half-hour YouTube video you were going to watch, or that TV show you were going to ignore while looking at your phone. And it's probably more fun than all the images and memes and GIFs and articles you were half reading while half watching something too. So I think if you want to do it, less and less excuses to not do it. And if you've just started writing, I would recommend submitting to Archetype especially. Everyone's been very friendly. There's taken a lot of time working on the piece with me, and they're even doing this. You've been listening to me ramble.
No,
so
I love
this could be you.
That's great. I love it. It's definitely something worth considering, especially like during this time where we're mostly at home instead of outside. Definitely that's an excuse that we tell ourselves. That's so amazing, so great. Thank you for joining us in the interview again, taking the time out of your day to do this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. We love Dwarf Your Lady Smudge by Jake Williams. Please, everyone, check it out. It'll be out in our first issue.